Good Sunday morning. What a great day it is. We are glad that our visitors have come our way. We appreciate you being with us. This morning, we're going to look at giving up our birthright. You know, it's kind of a strange thought to consider, giving up your birthright, but when you really get down to it and you start looking at what we have, you start looking at the things going on, and I see a lot of Christians that aren't acting like Christians. They aren't living like Christians. They aren't being what we would consider a Christian. They're not doing the things that God has given us. And so I have to ask, are they compromising so that they don't offend people? Or are they being different because they just have given up? We're going to look here and read from Genesis chapter 25, verses 29 through 34 here in just a second. But I want you to think about, as we read this, what really takes place between Esau and Jacob. Verses 29 through 34. Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field and was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am very weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." And Esau said, "Look, I am about to die, so what is this birthright to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils, and then he ate and drank, arose and went his way, and thus Esau despised his birthright. You know what's really sad when you really read this is, what in the world was Esau thinking? Get you a background real quick. In Jewish understanding, when it came to the birthright entitled the oldest son to have 2/3 of his father's things, his stuff, land, animals, servants, whatever was involved in this. He received the majority of the stuff. And then the younger brother or brothers would split what was left evenly. And so here Esau, being the older, has that birthright. And he goes out, and Esau was a hunter. And so he's been out all day long. And I can imagine, you ever come in from work, or ever come in from working in the garden, or working in the yard, or wherever you may have been, and you came in and you were just so hungry that you had to find something quick to eat. And so when you open the cabinet and you look through and you find you something and you put it together and you sit down and you eat it, and it's so satisfying. It may have just been a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but it was satisfying. Or if you're like I am, I kind of like peanut butter and banana myself. It's just satisfying. And so you eat that, oh man, that's so great. You ever told somebody you're so hungry you feel like you're starving to death? We've all said that, haven't we? And I kind of picture that's where Esau is right now. He's at that moment where he's just famished. You ever been so hungry that when you went to eat, you were literally shaking? You were so hungry? Yeah, maybe that's where Esau was. And maybe he was taking this shaking to be, oh, well, I'm about to die. So whatever the case is, did you see how he treated the birthright? Well, I'm about to die, so what's the point in the birthright? He just shrugged it off as if it was not important. And I know that the New King James calls it red stew. But if you really get into it, you notice the word lentils down toward the bottom part. You know what he was eating? Basically red beans. Now, if you're like I am, I love some red beans and rice. Get a little bit of cornbread with it. Maybe add some Tabasco sauce. Now I'm starting to get people hungry, aren't I? Yeah, and I could almost taste that right now. But that's what he sold his birthright for. Now, I've had some really good red beans and rice, but I haven't had such good red beans and rice as to give away my birthright. Because my birthright has absolutely nothing to do with this world and all to do with the world coming. Because my birthright is a birthright that saves and gives people the ability to have salvation and gives people the ability to have eternal life with Jesus Christ. Let me ask you this question. Here's our first question of the morning. Are you willing to give up your salvation? If someone came to you and they said, here's what you need to do. I want you to deny Jesus Christ. Are you willing to do that? Can you imagine what it must have been like in the first century? As Christians were being taken out of their homes, thrown in arenas, ready to have the wild beast pounce upon them. And all they have to do is say, I don't believe. And they can be released. I wonder, as I look at our society, if we're heading back into that same concept. To where Christians have to have the decision, am I going to stay with God? Or am I going to deny God exists so that I can have a better life here on earth? I wonder. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of red beans. It wasn't important. He didn't care. He wasn't worried about it. You know what that tells me about Esau? It tells me just exactly what the Word says in verse 29. He despised his birthright. Why? Why did Esau despise such an important document as his birthright? And that makes me ask today, do Christians who compromise the gospel, who compromise their worship, who compromise the life they're living, do they despise what God's done? Do they despise it? I hear people all the time say, oh, you claim to be a Christian, but you sure don't act it. I have a special one I love. I have people tell me all the time, you don't act like a preacher. Of which I have to really ask the next question, and y'all know where that's coming. How's a preacher supposed to act? Am I supposed to walk around in a suit all the time and have a tie on all the time and be, I am? Is that how I'm supposed to act? I think that's how we picture it. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty about it. We got preachers that work in the field. They handle cattle. They're farming. They do all sorts of different things. And why would we think that preachers are different from everybody else? Well, you don't act like a preacher. I was at a funeral, had an individual. I was in a polo at the visitation. I was in a polo and slacks. Guy talking to me, he says, "So you're doing the funeral?" I was like, "Yeah." He says, "You sure don't dress like a preacher." Of which my response was, "I'm in a country community." You ever imagine riding up on somebody that's having to birth a calf and you're in a suit and tie? I guarantee you, you don't want to birth a calf in a suit and tie. And yes, I didn't personally do it, but I stood there as he was doing it and I watched what happened, and that's how I can verify you don't want to do it. If I was in a city, I might be different. But I was in a country community. Jerome can verify you don't want to be in a suit and tie when you're birthing a calf. You ain't going to have that suit and tie afterward, by the way. I'm just going to let you know that. It's just amazing to think about. But yet, here's the way it is when it comes to why people say, well, you don't act like a Christian. Because they have this idea that Christians don't have fun. Like, we can't joke around and we can't have fun and we don't do all these other things. You know, what's fun to the world? Going out and getting drunk? Having parties all the time? Being higher than you could ever imagine? How is that fun? You don't know what you're doing? That's what makes it fun. Maybe that to me sounds like crazy. And yes, I've seen people that have been so high or so drunk that they had no clue what they were doing. And when they come off of it, people are telling them, like, "Oh, I didn't do that." How do you not? "Well, I don't remember." Or being so bad that you're passed out because of that's fun. Sounds to me like Russian roulette. Because you never know what's going on. Some Christians are willing to give up their salvation, though, for the pleasures of this life. Second question this morning. Are you willing to go back to what you had? I want you to stop for just a moment and think about this. I hear people all the time, and that's a totally different subject for another day, but I hear people all the time say, "Oh, well, I grew up in the church, and so I never really had this opportunity. I never really had this thing. And I really can't answer the going back into because I never really..." Whether you were raised with an understanding of the church and of what God tells us and shows us in His Word, and whatever the case may be of the background that you may have, there is one point in your life where you were not what God desired. You were not a Christian. You were not cleansed. You did not have the blood of Christ on you. There is a point in your life where you had nothing. You were useless to God. Is that what we want to go back to? Somebody once asked me, they said, "Who do you think make the greatest evangelists?" Now, first of all, I've got to explain, there are three things that are used in the Bible that today we call the preacher. Number one is preacher. Number two is minister. Number three is evangelist. They're all referenced in Scripture, but all of them have a different classification, in case you've never noticed this. The preacher was the one that actually would talk and teach in the assembly that was there. Paul did this for 3 years at Ephesus. But Paul also did something else that the preachers didn't do, and that was he evangelized. And so you would see this term evangelist used. And an evangelist was one that would go out and would tell people about Christ, would tell them about what Christ had done for man. And then you have the minister. And the minister was the one that was designed to be there to help, encourage, and build up individuals. Yes, one man can do it. A lot harder for one man to do all three jobs, but he can do it. But I was asked, what makes one of the greatest evangelists? And I said there are two classifications for this. Number one of the greatest evangelists I've ever seen is a man that did not grow up with an understanding of the true scriptures. Meaning he grew up understanding the teachings of Christ and understanding various things. But then when he was taught, when he understood better, or maybe he taught himself and realized that what he was doing wasn't right, he is one of the greatest evangelists because he knows how to answer people when they have questions. The second is an individual that was raised with an understanding of the church, but when they got older, they left the church because they wanted to be like the world. And then someone either A, got a hold of them, or B, they came back, whatever the case is, but they came back and they dedicated their life anew to Christ and to the things that He has. And they also are great evangelists because they have the ability to tell people and to talk to them because of where they've been and what they've done and what they've gone through. But we're not talking about that. We're asking, why would you want to go back to that lost state? To that state where you have nothing. To that state where it just doesn't matter. Because there is no salvation for you. You see, that's what the Hebrew writer is trying to get people to understand as he's writing to them. This is what you left, and why would you want to go back to it? Do you not understand the Scriptures? The whole letter to the Hebrews is exactly that. It's a writer writing to those that were Hebrew that had become Christians, and maybe those within that group were thinking, you know, everything's so difficult. We got this persecution. My family left me. My family disowned me. I just don't know what to do. I don't know. And he's writing them and he's saying, think about what you did. Your family already counts you dead. They've already had a funeral service for you. The family that you had, your kids, your wife, or vice versa, they've left. They're not coming back. Why would you want to go back into the lost state that you came out of? Knowing that Jesus died. Knowing that He's far more superior than the angels. Knowing that He's far more superior than the teachings of Moses. Knowing that He's far more superior than anything. Why would you want to go back? And that's where we are today as Christians. I have to ask those that want to be like the world, or those that want to be like everybody else that says they're Christian, and ask, why would you want to go back to a lost state? Why? What does it do? It just makes you lost. Esau despised his birthright. And when I see Christians that want to go back to what they were, lost, I see them despise their birthright as well. Because they think that it's better outside of the church. You've heard people say, oh, well, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. It may be true. They may be using some lawn care company to make their grass greener, but you know what? It still has to be mowed just like yours. In other words, you're going to have just as many problems on the other side of the fence as you are on your side of the fence. Why go back? Why would you want to? Why not hold on to what we have? Why not hold on to Christ and be what Christ desires of us? Some will not attend service because of reasons that don't hold up to God's wisdom. One of my favorite arguments that I've received throughout the years as to why somebody doesn't attend the congregation, oh, if such and such goes there, I won't ever go back. Two things have just occurred. One, you've given up your birthright, but two, you just allowed somebody else to dictate your terms of salvation. Why would you do that? Why would you want to do that? I'll never forget the time that I knocked on the door. Individual answered because I've been told, hey, this is a member of the congregation that hasn't been here for years. And when I say years, it was probably more like century. And I knocked on the guy's door, and he answers, and I said, I know you don't know me, but I'm preaching at, I'm not going to name the congregation. And the guy said straight to me, does such and such still run that congregation? Wow. That was an interesting way to put that question, wasn't it? Does such and such still run that congregation? I said, well, I don't know about running it, but he's still there. He says, don't even talk to me then. And so I proceeded to talk to him anyway. How bad is it? How bad was it? What can I do to help? He says, as long as that man attends there, I'll never step foot in that building ever again. Are you going anywhere? No. Why not? Let me tell you something about the church that most people don't think about. You know what the church is full of? Flawed people. The church is full of flawed people. And here's the truth. We wouldn't be the church if we were not flawed people. Because Christ would not have had to come and die on a cross if we were not flawed people. But we're flawed. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a flawed person. Doesn't matter if you're a preacher, doesn't matter if you're an elder, doesn't matter if you're an individual within the congregation. Flawed is good. You'll never hear somebody else say that probably, but flawed is good. You know why? Because when we realize just how flawed we are, we can realize the grace of God better. And we can understand the love that God has given. And what he's done. And why he's done. And we can understand the sacrifice that Jesus gave. Because we're flawed people. There's no one perfect in the congregation. And there never will be. So to allow someone that's flawed to determine whether or not I'm going to heaven or hell is an illogical assumption that once that individual leaves, that everything's going to be right. Because it's not. We should never think in those terms. Last question. Are you willing to let Satan win? By not living as God desires for you, Satan wins. Revelation chapter 21, verse 8. By not being and doing and living and showing and striving, Satan wins. Might as well just go ahead and give up if that's the case. Because here's the truth of the matter. If I'm going to go back to our illustration of earlier, if I'm going to allow someone else to dictate, I might as well give up just like this gentleman did. He had given up. I've heard people say, oh, well, I worship God in my home by myself. I had a guy tell me that one time. I just happened to be holding my Bible, and I was a smart aleck, as I usually am. And I handed him my Bible and said, please show me in book, chapter, and verse where worship is by yourself only. And he looked at me and he said, well, what do you mean? Moses worshiped God by himself. I said, show me where it says that. Abraham worshiped him by himself. Show me where it says it. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm saying show me where it says it. I said, because I can show you where it says when you come together. And the word together does not show singularity. It shows plurality. Which means that God does not expect us to worship Him under His law that He's given through His Son by ourselves in our home where no one else is. It's not there. But that's the way we want to be. By doing what the world desires, Satan wins. Romans chapter 1, you can start in verse 18 and go all the way to the end of the chapter. We looked at that just recently on Sunday night. By doing what the world desires, by doing what the world wants us to do, Satan wins. By going back to what we once had, Satan wins. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 25 and 26. By giving up our birthright, Satan wins. Now, you want to see how Satan can win in the church? Read 1 Corinthians. That just is a great example of how Satan wins. When Satan can divide the church, when Satan can split the individuals, when Satan does what he does best, which is twist what we say and make it sound worse than what we've said, and cause people to dislike us, he wins. When he sows discord in the brethren, Satan wins. Let me explain what I mean by that. I was preaching at a congregation shortly after we left here. And in that congregation, I could tell there were issues. Didn't take long to figure out there were issues. And when I approached the elders said, "Do you see a problem?" Of which my reply was, if you don't see a problem, there's a bigger problem. You see, Satan had done well. He sowed just enough discourse to cause the congregation to literally, even though it was in the same building, not be in the same building. And the leadership didn't even see it. And I'm asking the elders, how do you not see what's going on? I hadn't been with the congregation that long, and I saw what was going on. And so I started digging into some things and trying to find out answers. And what I found out was there was an issue in the congregation that had occurred 20 years before I ever stepped foot in the church building, and was never resolved. Satan had won. Why? Because they were willing to live with the discord instead of living in harmony, instead of having the joy of Christ, instead of working out their issues as the Scriptures teach, they decided, we're just going to be this way, and it doesn't matter, we're not going to change. My opinion's more important than your opinion. And it destroys every time. So how ought we be? Well, the question is, do we want Satan to win? Do we want to sell our birthright? Or do we want to be what God desires of us? Because that's where it's going to come down to. And if we want to be what God desires of us, then we've got to learn what God desires of us. And the only way we're going to find that out is through His Word. And the only way we're going to find that out is by being in His Word. And it doesn't matter what's going on outside. And it doesn't matter what people think is going on inside. As long as we're doing the will that God has set forth. That's all that's important. And when we listen to what people outside say, and when we listen to what other congregations say, then we lose ground. And when we lose ground, Satan wins. We don't need to worry about, and I'll just mention some of our sister congregations that we fellowship with. We don't need to know about the problems that are going on at Pine Hill, at Chisholm, Stony Point, Salem. Their problems are their problems. We've got enough here not to have to worry about everybody else. Because what we have here is we have a community that's around us that's hurting and needing God. And you and I are the ones that have that healing ability. Because we have Christ. And we need to take Christ to them. And that's it. Somebody once asked me, they said, how do you get people to come to services? I thought that was kind of a strange question. But then I understood what he was asking. He wasn't asking about the members. He was talking about visitors. He said, how do you get people to come and listen? And I said, you got it backwards. He said, what do you mean? I said, go back in and look what the Bible said. The Bible didn't say invite them to services. The Bible said go to them. You got to go talk to them. You got to bring them to Christ. Christ will bring them to the church. We can't put the cart before the horse. We've got to do it God's way. And this morning I look at and I ask, where are you? What's going on in your life? If you're not a Christian, what's keeping you back from it? If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, if you believe that you need to change your heart, your soul, your mind, your attitude, and you're willing to do that, if you're willing to confess Jesus before men, the water's ready. Jesus is ready. There's no sense of putting it off. Be immersed for the remission of your sins, calling on His name. If you're not a Christian, if you are a Christian, and you're not living it, what in the world's going on? Do what's right through prayer, confession of sin, and repentance. And you can do that right now. And we can help. All you have to do is step out and come forward right now while together we stand and sing this invitation song.